Welcome back, friends. It's Old Dad Guy, and tonight we're diving deeper into the shadows for Haunted Halloween Episode 2. The jack o' lanterns are burning low, the air's getting a little colder, and the ghosts, well, they've been waiting for you. If you thought last time stories rattled your nerves, tonight we're turning the scare dial up a notch. From haunted houses where footsteps never fade to encounters with things that don't belong in the dark. These are the tales that keep Halloween alive long after the candy runs out. So grab a blanket, pour yourself something warm or strong, and settle in by the glow of the fire. Because in episode 2, the night is only getting darker and the screams are just getting started. I realized that was cheesy, but I like cheese. The house that only opens on Halloween night. I grew up in a town where every street seemed to carry its own story, but there was one house everyone knew, even if no one ever admitted to believing in it. It sat on the corner of Ash and 3rd, a weather-beaten Victorian with sagging shutters and a porch that leaned as though the whole place was tired of standing. The windows were always dark. The yard grew wild, grass tall enough to swallow toys that had blown into it years before. Nobody had lived there in decades. But the story went like this. On Halloween night, the house opened its doors. Not every year, and not for everyone. Just sometimes. Kids would dare each other to knock. Teenagers would joke about spending the night inside. But by morning, the house was always sealed again, quiet and empty. And the few people who'd swore they stepped inside, well, nobody could agree on what they saw. Some said it was a carnival lit with strings of dead bulbs that flickered to life just for them. Others said they'd wandered the halls that stretched on forever, lined with mirrors that didn't always give their reflections back. One man, drunk on a dare, claimed he saw his dead wife waiting in a parlor, smiling and waving him deeper into the house. He didn't come back the same. It was legend, sure, a ghost story, but Halloween has a way of pressing its weight down on a town like mine, and when I turned 18, the story became more than just whispers. It became a choice. It started like these things always do. Too much bravado, not enough sense. A group of us had gathered after the parade, costumes still half on, faces sticky with cider and sugar. My best friend Caleb had the bright idea. "Let's do it," he said, eyes gleaming under the streetlight. "Let's knock." Nobody laughed. Nobody rolled their eyes, because the house was right there at the end of the block, hunched in shadow, like it had been waiting for us. I don't know why I agreed. Maybe it was the weight of the legend, or maybe it was the way the air felt that night. Too still, too sharp, like the town itself was holding its breath. So 6 of us walked down the block, costumes fluttering in the breeze, candy buckets swinging at our sides like offerings. The porch groaned beneath our feet. Up close, the house looked worse. Paint peeling, boards warped, air thick with a smell of damp rot. Caleb stepped forward, lifted the brass knocker and let it fall. The echo sounded, too loud, as though the house had swallowed it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sigh that rattled the windows, the door opened. Inside, the hallway glowed with a soft golden light. "Holy shit," someone whispered. Caleb grinned. "Guess it's our turn." And before I could protest, before I could think, we stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not dust, not mold, something sweet, like caramel apples and kettle corn, though faintly sour underneath. The second thing was the sound music, soft and distant, like a carousel turning somewhere, just out of sight. A hallway stretched ahead, lined with faded wallpaper, but as we walked, the house shifted. The wallpaper darkened, curling at the edges. The floorboards seemed to stretch, each step longer than the one before. And the farther we went, the less I recognized the voices around me. It wasn't my friend's laughter I heard. It was whispers. The house didn't open like a normal place. It peeled. One hallway bled into another, doors appearing where there hadn't been doors before. We split up without really meaning to. I wandered into a parlor lit by fire that didn't give off heat. Old portraits lined the walls, but when I leaned closer, I realized they weren't strangers. They were people I knew: my grandmother, my old neighbor, kids from school, all of them dead, and each portrait's eyes followed me. I stumbled back into the hall, only to find myself in a dining room where the table stretched longer than a road. Every seat was filled with mannequins and costumes: witches, vampires, clowns, heads turning in unison as I entered, their mouths opened in silent screams. I don't know how long I wandered. The house had no logic, no mercy. Once I heard Caleb calling my name. I chased the sound through a dozen doorways, but I never found him. Instead, I found mirrors, endless mirrors, lining a staircase that spiraled downward into black. My reflection lagged behind me, moving slower than I did, and smiling when I wasn't. Another time, I saw a child standing in a hallway, holding a pumpkin pail full of candy. She looked up at me with eyes too old for her face. "You're not supposed to be here," she whispered. Before I could ask what she meant, the lights flickered and she was gone. Eventually, I found the front door again, or maybe the house let me find it. The golden light still burned, soft and warm, spilling out onto the porch. My heart hammered in my chest, but I stepped forward, desperate to leave. And that's when I heard it, the carousel music, louder now, circling just behind me. I didn't look back. I ran. The door slammed shut the moment I hit the porch, rattling the glass in the windows. Behind me, the house was dark again, silent, empty. Of the six of us who went in, only three came out. Caleb never returned. Neither did Lisa. Their names still hang in our town like unspoken curses. The kind of loss no one admits, but everyone remembers. The police searched the house, of course, found nothing but dust and rotten boards. No light, no music, no signs of life. But I know what I saw, and every Halloween since, I've passed that house. It looks the same: leaning porch, dark windows, yard swallowing whatever dares to drift too close. But on Halloween night, if you stand at just the right angle, you can see it, the glow behind the door. And sometimes, if you listen closely, you can hear the carousel turning, waiting for the next fool to knock. The Jack-o'-lantern Man. I grew up in a place where October carried more weight than any other month. The leaves didn't just turn, they burned. Turn and burn. amber, scarlet, and burnt orange, flickering in the dying light like the woods themselves had caught fire. The air grew sharp, the kind that makes you breathe deeper without really meaning to, and with the first hint of frost, everyone knew it was time to carve pumpkins, hang paper ghosts, and whisper about things we weren't supposed to believe in anymore. We had a legend in our town, one that stuck with us long after we stopped trick or treating. They called him the Jack o' Lantern Man. The story was always the same, passed around like a secret at football games and hay rides. A figure with a pumpkin for a head, hollow eyes glowing like coals, wandering the cornfields after dark. He didn't chase you, he didn't run, he only watched. And if you were foolish enough to meet his gaze for too long, you'd vanish into the rows, never to come back. Of course, no one really believed it. Legends like that aren't supposed to survive past childhood. But then came the Halloween I turned 17. That was the year I learned some legends don't fade, they wait. It started at a bonfire behind the old mill. Half the senior class was there, clustered around the flames, pretending to be braver than we were. Somebody passed around cheap beer. Somebody else started telling the old story again. You know the deal, my friend Matt said, raising his voice over the crackle of the fire. Every Halloween, the jack o' lantern man comes out. If you walk the cornfield road at midnight, you'll see him. People laughed, a few rolled their eyes, but there was an energy in the air, the kind of restless buzz that comes when fear and curiosity get tangled together. That's when the dare came. Let's go see him. It was stupid, it was reckless, but it was Halloween. And when you're 17, the line between daring and dangerous is easy to miss. So at 11:30 that night, four of us slipped away from the fire. Me, Matt, his girlfriend Erin, and my neighbor Jake. And we headed down the dirt road that cut straight through the cornfields. The stalks rose high on both sides, dried and brittle, rattling in the wind. The moon was fat and pale, the kind that makes shadows seem sharper than they should. Remember the rules, Erin said with a smirk, though I noticed she kept close to Matt's arm. Don't look him in the eyes, and don't follow him if he calls you. And for God's sake, don't run. Sounds like a campfire story, Jake muttered, kicking at the dirt. Bet the only thing out here is raccoons. We kept walking, the gravel crunching under our shoes. The road stretched ahead, swallowed by darkness. My heart pounded faster with every step, though I tried to hide it. At 11:59, we stopped. Midnight, Matt whispered. Showtime. We waited. At first, nothing, just the wind pushing through the stalks, the faint echo of the bonfire behind us. And then I saw it. A glow. Faint at first, like the ember of a dying fire, deep within the rows of corn. Tell me you see that, I whispered. The glow grew brighter, shaping itself into two hollow eyes and a jagged grin. He stepped out slowly, as if the field itself had released him. Tall, too tall, shoulders hunched beneath a ragged coat. His head was round and heavy, carved with a crooked smile, flickering from within like a lantern. The jack-o'-lantern man. Aaron gasped. Jake swore under his breath. He didn't move toward us, didn't raise a hand. He only stood at the edge of the corn, firelight eyes fixed upon us. Holy shit, Matt breathed. It's real. None of us spoke. None of us ran. We just stared back, frozen. Then the figure tilted its head, slow and deliberate, like a curious crow. The light inside his grin pulsed brighter, then dimmed like a heartbeat. Don't look at him too long, Aaron whispered, but I couldn't look away. The moment broke when Jake bolted. Hell no, I'm out, he shouted, sprinting down the road. His footsteps echoed against the silence, fading fast. The figure's head turned to follow him. The grin widened. And then, impossibly, the jack-o'-lantern man stepped back into the corn, without moving his legs, without rustling the stalks, until he vanished. Jake, Aaron called. Matt grabbed her arm. No, don't. But she pulled free and ran after him. And just like that, I was alone. The road stretched ahead, black and endless. Behind me, the bonfire was too far away to see. The only sound was the dry whisper of corn shifting in the wind. I stood there, trembling, until I heard it. Footsteps. Not running, not hurried, just steady, deliberate steps, pacing me from within the corn. I walked faster. So did the steps. I broke into a run. The glow flared to life beside me, keeping pace. That grinning face appeared between the stalks, close enough to burn into my vision. Don't run, Aaron's voice echoed in my head, but I couldn't stop. When I finally stumbled into the open lot by the mill, I collapsed, gasping for air. The bonfire had died down to embers. Most everyone had gone home. Matt was there, pacing, his face pale. Where's Aaron? Where's Jake? He demanded. I shook my head. My throat was too dry to answer. We searched. We yelled their names until our voices broke, but the cornfield swallowed every sound. By morning, they were gone. Police searched for days. No footprints, no sign of struggle. Just two kids who walked into the Halloween night and never came out. It's been 10 years since that night. The town doesn't talk about it anymore. People don't want to admit what really happened. But every Halloween, I drive past that field, and without fail, I see him, the jack-o'-lantern man, standing at the edge of the rows, lantern eyes glowing, waiting for me to look too long. And I wonder if this is how it works. If one year, I'll finally stop driving, finally step back onto that road, and finally take my place in the corn beside Jake and Aaron. Because some legends don't fade, they just wait. The Lantern Walk. The paper flyer showed up in our mailbox the last week of October, like it always did. Folded twice, ink a little smudged from the damp, the edges deckled as if it had been cut with a dull blade. Our neighborhood didn't have a homeowners association or a Facebook group or anything official that could have organized it. The lantern walk simply happened, the way a tide happens, and the flyer was the moon we could hold in our hands. Rules, black and plain across the top. 1. Bring your own lantern, no flashlights. 2. Stay on the footpath. Do not step into the ditch. 3. Keep your light burning until you cross the iron bridge. 4. Do not count the lanterns. There was no address, just a hand drawn map with a crooked arrow down Sycamore Lane, through the little patch of woods behind the stormwater basin, and out to a clearing with an iron bell on a wooden post. The flyer never said who made it. Nobody signed a name. When I asked my neighbors, they shrugged and said it was a tradition, older than the cul-de-sacs and the vinyl siding, older than the storm drains and the stop signs, older than our town, if you listen to the people who liked telling stories on porches, that is. I'd walked it plenty as a kid when my mother would float a paper lantern in a mixing bowl while she checked the wicks with the patience of a jeweler. She tied mine to a bamboo pole with cotton string, then put a hand on my shoulder and made me repeat the rules. Especially the last one, she'd say. Don't be rude. Don't count. Back then, I thought it was about the manners. Now I'm not sure it ever was. This year I went because Nora asked me to. We went to high school together, but hadn't talked much since. In September, she moved back into her parents' split-level house, 4 houses down from mine. One afternoon, she waved from her porch with a cardboard box under one arm, and a look I recognized. A person trying to belong again in a place that had continued without her. You still do the lantern walk? She asked a week later. My mom says it kept the neighborhood from feeling like any other place. It does, I said. And then, because the flyer always makes me feel 12 and serious, I added, I still have a lantern. Good, she said. I don't want to go by myself. The night arrived with the brittle edge the last evenings of October always carry, a taste of metal in the air as if the season were a blade being drawn from its sheath. Porches up and down the block glowed with jack-o'-lanterns. The bigger kids were still roaming in costume, sacks clapping against their knees. But the smallest ones had gone inside to count candy. From somewhere behind me, a radio murmured, a baseball recap. And from somewhere ahead, someone's fire pit set up a ribbon of smoke that smelled like applewood. I set my paper lantern on the hood of my car while I worked the wick. It was a cylinder I'd made long ago from parchment and thin wire, painted with watercolored moon and a ribbon of geese. I don't know what any of that just meant. The years had left it stained and soft, but the thing held. When I breathed on the match, the wick took flame with a small, serious sound, and the lantern found its purpose again, warmth turning the paint to a quiet glow. Nora came up the sidewalk in a thrifted peacoat with a new lantern in her hands. One of those delicate honeycomb spheres you buy flat and pull into shape. She'd inked stars across the paper, little pricks that would throw points of light across us as we walked. She grinned when she saw mine. Of course you painted yours, she said. Of course it has geese. Well, that's what the geese meant. They always know the way out, I said, and meant it as a joke, though the words didn't fall like a joke in that night. They folded themselves neatly and went still, like they'd found where they wanted to land. Neighbors gathered at the end of Sycamore, lanterns bobbing gently on their poles. Kids jostled. The older ones tried to look solemn because of the rules demanded it. The adults shuffled and cleared throats and traded thermoses. Someone's golden retriever let out a low huff when a cardboard skeleton swung near its nose, then decided even ghost bones weren't worth a fuss. On the curb, a grandmother tied red yarn around a small boy's wrist and her own. You stay with me, she said, tugging the knot tight. No running. Somewhere in the cluster, as always, stood Mr. Dalrymple. Round hat, dark coat that looked both too thin and too heavy, a walking stick with a ferrule that clicked softly on the asphalt when he shifted his weight. He never said he was in charge, but he always walked first. He lifted his lantern, a square thing of yellowed glass and black metal, and nodded, and the crowd found its hush. We stepped off the road and onto the grass, down the slope and into the ribbon of trees that ran behind the houses like a hem. The storm water ditched, gurgled, cold enough to taste if you breathed deep. Our lights picked up the old footpath, roots pushing through the dirt like knuckles. Rules, I thought, and felt my mother's hand on my shoulder the way you feel lake water long after you've towed off. No flashlights. Stay on the path. Keep your light burning until you cross the iron bridge. Do not count the lanterns. I did not count. I tried not to notice how many there were. The first stretch is always a kind of negotiation. Suburban turf becoming something else. On our left, fence posts. On the right, scrub growth and the thick black loam that drinks spring floods. Our lanterns threw coin sized lights over last year's leaves. Here and there, we passed the little wooden stakes the township had pounded in for a survey last summer, their orange plastic flags stuttering in the breeze. What were they measuring? Nora asked. Where the basins overflow, I said. Where not to build. The path narrowed. The ditch rose at the edges like lips. When I was little, I'd always imagined the ditch as a throat the rain went down into the earth by. The adults never liked me to say that at the table. It wasn't polite to talk about bodies when you were supposed to be grateful for casseroles. The ditch burbled now the way a person does when they're half asleep and content. I let the sound set our pace. Look, Nora said, and lifted her lantern to a trunk ahead. Someone had carved 3 short lines into the bark at shoulder height, evenly spaced, not long ago. They were almost grown over, silvered scars rather than wounds, but the groove of each mark still held a shadow. Trailblazes, I said. Maybe. When did anyone need to mark a trail here? She asked. I didn't answer. The town is new. The dirt is not. We reached the spot where everyone stops first without being told. The path descends into a shallow basin before it rises again toward the bridge, and the ditch braids itself into 3 channels there, like hair. People say it's where the old creek forgot which way the hill leaned after a flood. People say a lot. What we do is pause and listen, not because we're told to, but because we want to make sure the night has room to fit us. I heard shoes scuffling, a pole knocking softly against a knee, somebody's zipper catching on a sleeve, a toddler's quiet complaint at being lifted, a drop of wax hitting the metal rim of a lantern like a tiny bell, and beneath those, something else, a rhythm just slower than our footsteps, another set of feet, deferred a half beat, neither behind us nor ahead of us, but sideways to where time usually puts things. I didn't look for it. The rules say nothing about looking. They only say not to count. Cold? I asked, and passed Nora the thermos I'd tucked into my coat. She took a mouthful and made the face you make when you expect cider and get tea. It's fine, she said, and and swallowed again out of stubbornness. When we started down, our lanterns rocked in the old way. Poles angled forward, then back, the kind of march that feels like rowing. The little channels of water took the light and made coins of it, and the banks made pockets for the coins to live in until they went dull and old. I did not count the lanterns that were not ours. The iron bridge isn't long. It crosses the ditch where it gathers itself and runs in a straight line toward the culverts under the service road. The county must have put the bridge in when the development went up in the 90s. The span throws a small shadow at noon and a long one at 5. The rails are cold to the hand 12 months out of the year. The only warm thing about it is the rust. The rule is to keep your light burning until you're across. Most people take it like a game. Kids crouch to shield their candles with their palms. Adults lean their paper walls away from the wind. The bridge imposes a slowness no sidewalk can teach. One person on at a time, pole vertical, wood clanking faintly on metal grating. A little parade of breathing with nothing to look at but your own circle of light. Mr. Dalrymple went first. His metal lantern moved like a thought swinging from hem to hem inside a skull. Then a woman in fleece with a sleeping baby against her chest. Then a couple of fifth graders elbowing each other for their second position and getting neither because a younger kid went between them with the solemn speed of someone on a balance beam. Nora touched my sleeve. Is yours okay? The wick had settled. The flame had found its height. The watercolored geese moved as if the paper could hold wind. You? I asked. Brand new, she said. The little wire ribs look like bones if you stare too long. They are bones, I said, and smiled to soften it. Just gentle ones. We waited our turn. Across the water, I saw lights that were not ours burning at angles that didn't match the heads or hands of anyone I knew. They were not reflected lights. They were their own sources, and yet somehow thinner, as if starved of air. One hung low, inches above the water, drifting against its own ribbon of smoke with the slow confidence of a jellyfish. No one carried it. No one reached for it. It bobbled toward the bridge as if drawn. I looked down at my shoes. I am not a brave person. I am only stubborn. I let the stubbornness be the thing that drove my boot onto the first metal grate. The iron vibrated in the exact tone of my front porch step when it's thinking of winter. Halfway across, the flame in my lantern tried to lean wrong in the wind. It snapped back and steadied. I breathed out. On the far side, I stepped onto dirt and felt the relief travel up through my legs like heat. Nora followed me. Behind her, more light, and behind those, another rhythm. The bridge sang its little note again and again and again, and I did not count how many times. The clearing past the bridge is nothing by day. Some broom sedge, a ring of saplings, the corner of a retention basin with its posted warning about depth after storms. But at night, it feels like the town's last unpaved thought. The iron bell sits on a timber frame. It is not as old as people say. You can see the cast date if you crouch and clean the lip with your thumb. Still, it has learned distance. Strike it and you'll hear the pitch arrive from 3 places. From the bell, from the woods, and from somewhere a little to the left of the moon. As if sound could reflect off a year ahead of itself and return out of sequence. We come here to ring it. Nobody announces that part. Nobody gives a speech. You either know or you learn by standing near people who do know. Mr. Dalrymple reached the frame and set his lantern on the ground and drew the rope through his hand like a sailor testing a new line. He looked out over the crowd, our actual crowd, the ones with hands and names and addresses. Then beyond us to the people shaped negatives only the lantern light revealed. He nodded once to nobody and everybody and pulled. The bell opened like a throat clearing. One tone, then another, a low vowel that made my ribs remember they'd been built in a long room once. That my body had been older bodies, copied from older bodies, in, in an unbroken line of rooms that no zoning board had ever argued with. The air folded and unfolded. A half dozen toddlers started to cry and then forgot why. The dog whined and pressed against its person's knees and was told it was good. We took turns ringing. Not all of us. Some people will always stand back, hands on poles, pleased to let others be seen. But enough to make the night say it back. When it was my turn, the rope roughened my palm just the way it had when I was 10. The sound lifted and I felt it in my teeth. I let the rope rise through my fingers slower than I meant to, as if my hand worried it would drop the tone and break it. As Nora reached for the rope, her lantern flickered. Not the agreeable kind of flicker that belongs to any flame and makes a person look more attractive in a bar. It went thin, like a voice when the phone connection loosens. "Hey," she said, soft to the paper, reflexively soothing it the way you soothe a hiccuping child. "Stay with me." A shape near the bell turned its head. It didn't have to. I felt the attention like a draft. The thin lantern I'd seen drifting above the water earlier bobbed higher now, as if the bell had tugged it by its thread. Two others sidled near. Yes, sidled, as if they had hips. They were not ours. Nobody I could name held the poles they dangled from. They hung where arms would have been, at the heights arms would have been, but the bodies weren't there, just the consequence of bodies, expressed in light. "Your wick," I said to Nora, too fast. The wick sank. I crouched and slid my hand inside the paper cylinder, careful not to scorch the watercolor. I raised her little tea light onto its foil base again, the heat pinching my knuckles. "Breathe on it," I said, remembering my mother's tone when she taught me the trick. Nora did, steady and polite as if the flame were shy. It swelled obediently. The thin lanterns backed off a fraction, like birds reconsidering a windowsill. Nora rang the bell. For a heartbeat, I'm allowed that metaphor. The night felt like it had remembered our names. You don't speak names at the Lantern Walk. Not in full. Not the way the mail carrier says them. You nod or squeeze a shoulder or tug a sleeve, and you point with your chin if you need to point. It's not a posted role. It's something the place prefers. Even so, names gather. They gather in the ditch when a winter is dry, written in boots treads that never quite fill. They gather on the underside of the bridge where kids have pressed thumbprints into the old paint. They gather in the bark of the trees where the blazons live, 3 short lines, ages ago, in somebody's careful hand. The people who don't come anymore have names too. There was the teenager who liked to skate the basin lip in May. He left for the shore and never came back. There was the old man who always wore a cap, even in July, and told the dog he was handsome, as if it were news. He moved to live nearer his daughter, and then moved no more. There was a toddler who wandered from his stoop and was found safe in a neighbor's azaleas, eating a handful of dirt and laughing about a joke none of us had told. We like to tell stories that end that way. We keep them polished. We put them in the good glass cabinet. Standing by the bell, I realized I could name more people who had left than I could people who had arrived. I realized my list of those names included versions of myself and versions of Nora that had gone off to other cities and lives, not to come back to ring anything. The thought wasn't sad as much as wide, a field you walk onto and realize you have farther to go than you'd planned. The thin lanterns drew closer again, courteous but insistent. One hovered between me and the ditch, a pale coin with its face turned just wrong. I pretended it was fog. It pretended I had succeeded. Mr. Dalrymple cleared his throat, not to get attention, to give us an excuse to look his way. Mind your wicks, he said, the first words I had heard him utter in years of walks. If your light fails, take an arm. Don't accept a hand you didn't come here holding. Nobody asked him to repeat it. Most years there's an almost, the kind that becomes a family story on the ride home. The wind that suctions a lantern wall into a tea light and forces a quick patch with a thumb. Shoe that slips into the mud just shy of the bridge. A child who wants to run and is bought off with a caramel and the promise of ringing twice next time. It's the almost that lets people go home proud. We did it. Look at us. The old rules still make sense. This year, the almost was Nora. Her lantern dimmed again and then steadied, and then went thin as a breath. She pinched the wire ribs to widen the sphere and feed it air. The paper crumpled a bit. The star holes she'd punched lost their symmetry, and then remembered it. The light went small, a pearl rolling in a shell. Take my pole, I said, and lifted the bamboo that carried my geese. I'll sort yours. She shook her head. They said not to trade. They said not to count, I said, and immediately wished I hadn't put the words in my mouth. They said a lot of things, she answered, and that should have been a joke between us, a relief. But in the clearing, it felt like the wrong chord. The thin lantern nearest us tipped toward her. The pole it hung from touched the grass and left no mark. The lantern's paper wall had no paint. It had the look of something made by a hand that never had to learn patience. Past it, I saw another light, held higher, exactly at the height of my shoulder, and for a moment, I had the terrible sense that if I reached out for it, I would find a sleeve. Take my arm, I said, sharper. Now. She hooked her elbow through mine. Her lantern's pearl swelled once, as if relieved. We stood that way, awkward and close, and looked like a couple deciding whether to dance. The old man's words pushed air through my ears. Don't accept a hand you didn't come here holding. And I understood them as if they had been written on the underside of my skin. Across the clearing, a boy broke from his father and ran toward the bell. The father lunged and missed. The boy's lantern bobbled gaily on its pole, a pumpkin face his mother had drawn with loving symmetry. Two thin lights met him halfway, kindly as ushers. The boy stopped between them, delighted with his sudden audience, and lifted his lantern so they could admire the art. One of the thin lights tipped towards its wick. It was only leaning closer the way you lean when you want to see a thing in detail. It was only that. The boy's flame elongated, then went short, then went out, as if it had become shy. The boy laughed because he trusted the moment to be harmless. His father reached him and lifted him and the pumpkin lantern, which had already turned cold. The father shivered the way people do when their bodies understand something their brains aren't ready to say aloud. Mr. Dalrymple's metal lantern burned so steadily he might have fixed time inside it with a screw. Home, he said, not loud, not a command, a direction that felt like a door opening. The walk back always feels longer because you can see the back of what you passed on the way out. You can see how the ditch has undermined the roots. You can see how the survey stakes lean toward their own shadows. You can see where kids have cut switches and where the trees above the path have stitched their fingers over the years. You can also see the houses sooner than you want to. Lights in squares, TV blue pouring through curtains, and you can feel the part of you that would rather go slow. The rule that never got written: do not look behind you after the bell stops ringing. Nobody says it because nobody has to. The path narrows our choices down to forward, and forward is plenty. We crossed the bridge one by one. Metal chimed underfoot like a wind chime that refuses to be pretty. The thin lanterns gathered on the far bank and made a crescent of light, like an old photograph left in the sun. I kept my eyes on the grating. Halfway across, Nora's elbow tightened around mine. Don't let go, she said. Not as fear, exactly, but as fact. I'm here, I said, and we took the second half of the span with the kind of care people reserve for carrying soup. On the other side, one of the thin lights drifted into the ditch and held itself there, just above the water, keeping pace with us at a gentle, patient speed. It did not jostle for position. It did not announce itself. It simply matched our rhythm, a metronome that had learned to breathe. When the path rose and the ditch fell away, it let us go. The feeling was so polite, I almost turned to thank it. Past the first set of blazes, we stopped again without deciding to. Our neighbors' voices began to sound like neighbors' voices again. Somebody making plans for leftovers, somebody reminding a teenager to put the pole in the garage instead of leaving it where the car would crush it, somebody promising cocoa. A toddler kicked a shoe into the grass and yelled the way toddlers do when they find a way to be furious and relieved at the same time. The dog shook, tags chiming. You could have convinced yourself nothing had happened if you were practiced at that sort of convincing. At the lip of the basin, a gush pushed across the grass with enough force to bow the lanterns. My geese flew faster, their paper bodies rippling as if the watercolors had learned to move. Nora's star-pricked globe tilted and steadied and tilted again. I reached to keep it from kissing her sleeve. For an instant, quick as static, I felt a second hand on mine that wasn't hers, and wasn't mine, and also wasn't cold. It was the temperature of the air when you open a door and expect a chill and find a room that has been warm a long time. We did not say anything. We didn't need to. The rules had already said enough for everyone. On Sycamore, the porch lights looked too bright. House numbers looked like declarations. Here, 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 and the people under them looked like versions of themselves they wore for the benefit of other people. In windows, cats watched, bored and curious. Somebody's television laughed on a beat that didn't belong to anything. A teen cut between hedges, pretending not to see any adults because adulthood felt contagious. We returned our lanterns to their ordinary roles with the courtesy you give a guest who has told a story you don't know how to thank them for properly. I blew out my flame, and the geese became pain again. Nora folded the wire ribs of her little starry moon and tucked it into its flat sleeve and slid it into her coat like a kind letter. Around us, people touched elbows and said goodnight and made plans they might or might not keep. Mr. Dalrymple tipped his hat to no one in particular and walked home with his stick, making that exact soft click that lets you know the feral has seen winners. At my mailbox, Nora hesitated. Did you? She began, then stopped. Not because she didn't have the words. She has always had words. But because choosing the wrong ones felt like it might reset something we had just set carefully on the table. I didn't count, I said. Me either, she said. But I know there were more than there should have been. Every year, I said, and immediately wished I hadn't made it a formula, at least since my mother brought me. She touched the place her lantern had burned warm on her palm. I thought it would feel scary, she said. It didn't. It felt like you get when someone you can't see is standing behind you, but they're not trying to make you jump. They're just waiting for their turn to look out the window. We said goodnight like normal people and walked to our doors and put our poles in our garages and checked that our candles were truly out. I made tea I didn't drink. I went to bed and let my body think about the bridge until the moment the bridge stopped being a bridge and became sleep. In the morning, the ditch was a ditch again, brown and useful and full of crushed leaves from 3 different blocks that had decided to agree for once and travel the same direction. The basin sat with its warning sign and the ring of gravel the township had paid too much for. The survey flags were still there, orange tongues tasting a wind that had forgotten us. I walked back to the clearing while the sky was the color of a nickel and the day had not yet chosen what kind of day it would be. The bell looked like nothing special. I touched the lip where I had cleaned it as a child and let the last night's tone step out of my mouth as a humming that didn't deserve the name. The sound went nowhere, which was a relief. Not every note needs to come back. On my way home, I saw Mr. Dalrymple pruning a shrub that had grown wild over a low fence. He lifted his hat. I lifted my hand. You spoke, I said before my manners caught up with me. It seemed useful, he said. His voice was not old or young. It was the sound of a thing that had been used as intended. Useful to who? I asked, and surprised myself at how direct I sounded. To the people who meant to go home, he said, and to the people who didn't, but will. He trimmed a branch, considered the shape he'd left, and trimmed another. I like seeing the lights on the bridge, he added, as if we were discussing holiday decorations. They look like the town telling itself the time. Did they go somewhere? The others? I asked. They go where they go, he said. Some to doorways that open inward. Some to windows that remember faces. Some to the ditch for a while when the water is agreeable. He met my eyes. They're not trying to take anything. They're trying to be counted by someone who can't count them. I thought of the rule printed on the flyer before the ink had smudged. I thought of my mother's hand on my shoulder. I thought of Nora's arm through mine, the weight of it exactly right, the heat exactly human. I nodded. I can't help with that, I said. No, he agreed, friendly as a neighbor explaining how to keep the deer off your hostas. But you can keep your lantern lit when the bridge asks you to. You can show the way across without deciding anyone's destination. He went back to his trimming. I went back to my sidewalk. On my porch, I found a scrap of paper that had blown under the chair. It was a corner torn from the flyer. Just the words, "Keep your light burning," and the bottom curl of the letter G, where bridge would have been. I lifted it and it gave me a little shock the way winter does when it misses you and taps you on the finger to say so. At dusk, I walked down to Nora's with my lantern rebuilt and the wick trimmed clean. I didn't have a reason. The day didn't require one. We stood at the curb for a few minutes and watched a child learn to ride without training wheels, while a parent jogged 2 steps behind with a hand steady and then not needed. When the parent let go, the child didn't shout. He didn't do anything at all. He just kept going, which is its own kind of noise. Next year? Nora asked without looking at me. Next year, I said. We didn't shake on it. We didn't promise. We didn't say what we'd do if a thin light offered to walk beside us again. We didn't say what we'd do if one of ours went shy. We didn't need to. Some rules are printed and some live in the way you stand on a bridge, one at a time. Pull vertical, flame steady, eyes forward. The whole small town using paper and breath to make a path through a night that was already willing to let you pass. And that's going to do it for tonight's journey through the shadows, friends. If your lights are flickering or you catch yourself checking the corners of the room a little more often, well, I'd say episode 2 did its job. Halloween is all about that thin line between fun and fear, and I hope these stories brought you just the right mix of chills and thrills. If you enjoyed tonight's scares, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you'll be ready when episode 3 creeps out of the dark. Until then, keep your lanterns lit, keep your candy close, and if you hear a knock at the door this late at night, maybe let it go unanswered. Unless it's DoorDash. I'm OldDadGuy, wishing you a haunted Halloween, and I'll see you in the next one. You thought you were alone, didn't you? But they've been watching the whole time. Like, subscribe, and maybe they'll let you sleep tonight.